Hey guys, this is Andrew from Dividend Growth Masters. So a while ago, I released a video about SEC Form 4 and how you can read insider transactions for public companies. And there were a lot of questions about transaction codes. So that's what this video is going to cover with the SEC Form 4. So if you look at all these SEC Form 4s, let's just take a look at this one for the CFO of Apple, Luca. You can see there's under the transaction code here, it has a code for S, and that is telling you what's going on with their shares. So just as a quick recap, all insiders of publicly traded companies are required to file forms with the SEC when there's a change in the beneficial ownership of their shares. So whenever they sell shares, whenever they buy shares, whenever they get shares as a part of their stock compensation plan, whenever they give shares to charity, all that sort of stuff. If there's a change in their shares that they own, then they have to report them to the SEC if they are a publicly traded company. So like this one, the transaction code here is S. So what does S mean? Well, that's what we're going to cover today. So this really handy document from the SEC covers a lot of things you need to know about Form 4, especially the transaction codes. Now, as you can see here, there's a lot of different transaction codes. So I won't go over all of them in the video, but I will go over the most common ones that you'll see out in the wild. Okay, so let's start with the first one that's on this list, which is P. So if you see a P transaction code, that means the insider purchased shares either on the open market or through a private transaction. Now, this transaction code isn't as common for large companies like Apple, Microsoft, Google, Amazon, those type of companies, because insiders already receive a lot of shares through the stock compensation plan. But you will see this transaction code more often in smaller companies, like small cap companies, mid cap companies, where insiders may potentially buy shares to signal that they're bullish on the company. The transaction code that you'll probably see the most is S. So that's the one we just talked about. So when you see a transaction code S, it means the company insider sold shares. Plain and simple, they sold shares. So if you look at this transaction from Apple's CFO, you can see they sold shares on October 28, 2022. They sold 14,274, 85,000, 69,000, and 7,200 shares, all on the same day. And it also tells you the price that he sold those shares at. So the S transaction code is when they sell shares. And that's probably the most common one that you will see when you're looking through and analyzing these Form 4s from the SEC. Next transaction code that you will probably see a lot of is M. So M is when the company insider exercises options or restricted stock units from the stock compensation plan. So as part of their stock compensation plan, many executives or people on the board of directors will receive stock from the company. So when they exercise those rights for those options, then they need to file a Form 4. Next most common transaction code you might see is F. So F is basically what it says here: payment of exercise price or tax liability by delivering or withholding securities to the recipient. So basically, when you're an executive and you receive stock options or restricted stock units as a part of your compensation plan, you are taxed when you exercise them. So if you exercise your shares, the company will basically take some of those shares to satisfy the tax obligations, the tax liability of exercising those options. And you'll see that in the transaction here. Let's look at this Form 4, which is also with Apple from their senior vice president. So you can see on October 15, 2022, the executive exercised 16,612 options from her stock compensation plan. So on that same day, they withheld 8,559 shares from her. You can see that through the transaction code F here. And then 2 days later, she sold 8,053 shares from exercising those options. The next transaction code that you'll see a lot is the A transaction code. So basically, when you see a transaction code with A, it means that the insider was awarded shares as a part of their stock compensation. So if let's say they received 1,000 shares, 1,000 stock options as part of their stock compensation plan, then you will see this A transaction code. So if you look at this insider SEC form, and you'll see that they didn't buy or sell any securities, but they did report that this executive, the senior vice president, she received restricted stock unit shares as a part of her compensation plan. So on September 25th, 2022, she received 66,477. Now, the final transaction code that I want to go over is G. So G is a bona fide gift. It basically means that the executive gave shares away as a gift. So it could either be they gifted the shares to a charity, or they gifted the shares to, say, their spouse, their children, or to like a trust fund that they own. So those are the most common reasons why you'll see a G transaction code. So I guess the best example of this would be Warren Buffett. So if you look through Berkshire Hathaway's Form 4 filings, you may see that he may file a Form 4 for gift donations when he gives away some of his shares to charities. So those are the most common transaction codes that you'll see when you're looking at Form 4s. So the P transaction code for a purchase of shares either in the open market or through a private transaction. The S transaction code when the executive sells shares. The A transaction code when the executive is given shares as a part of stock compensation plans. F transaction code when the executive, when some of the shares are exercised to satisfy tax obligations. The M transaction code when the executive exercises their stock options or restricted stock units. And finally, the G transaction code when the executive gives away shares as a gift. So you can, just by looking at these transaction codes and learning from them, you can look through, all the SEC Form 4s and be able to understand what exactly is going on to the executive's shares. And that's really important if you're analyzing a company. So I'll put a link to this document in the description of the video so you can click on it and download it and save it, print it out for you to look at as well. So this is a very handy document. Hopefully you were able to better understand the general transaction codes of SEC Form 4s. If you have any other questions, just leave a comment in the description and I'll try to get to them.